Watch this.
You know, they don't call it fine print for nothing. But one bank's terms and conditions were anything but fine for one customer, and she called them on it.
Sales tax is wrong. In practice, the sales tax is wrong. In substance, this bill is wrong.
If collecting extra on sales is wrong, well, then Idaho hasn't wanted to be right for a long time. How it started and how it's going when it comes to the Gem State's retail taxes. It's not the heat, it's the... No, it's definitely the heat. When it's about to be hotter than Satan's house cat, or Blue Blazes, or Georgia asphalt, or... You get the idea. What about all the other things you've already heard when it comes to the heat? Your cell phone has them, and every update that comes with it is part of it. Websites have them, even banks have them. Those small print, single-spaced, long list of terms and conditions, pages and pages long. When was the last time you took the time to read through it completely? Well, if you're like most, it's just a formality of skimming and scrolling to get to the end, to that Agree tab, because you think it's too long to read, and it's probably fine, and you likely don't have much of a choice if you disagree anyway. Well, for one Treasure Valley woman, she decided she did have a choice after she actually read the new terms and conditions from Idaho Central Credit Union. And as she told Hunter Funk, there was one thing that caught her eye.
I think a lot of us are just used to scrolling through those legal documents. Okay, just accept. But I just thought, because most of my money is there, so I just wanted to kind of take the time and just kind of scroll through it.
Carla Patterson was an ICCU member for 5 years. That changed after a new terms and conditions document was sent to her inbox.
I came to section 13, and when I saw that, it was very sketchy. It was very questionable. There was a lot of things that, for me, I have used money on.
Section 13 states the prohibited uses, where users would agree not to request, send, or receive money related to
all of the prohibited uses. Obviously some might get illegal drugs, controlled substances, but firearms, ammunitions, and other weapons. Materials that promote intolerance, violence, or hate. In whose definition, and what does that mean? A Ponzi scheme or pyramid scheme? Again, I don't know what that means.
Patterson's document also claimed it prohibits traveler's checks, money orders, cryptocurrencies. You can't send money outside the United States. It also states users can't use their money for court-ordered payments, alimony, or child support fines.
It just said all of these things you can't use your money on, which is very scary.
Patterson says she spoke to her local branch asking what she should do if she doesn't agree to that.
She basically made it known that you agree or you leave. So at that point, I started closing my accounts.
After reaching out to ICCU, they stated, on June 26th, we updated our e-branch agreement to include standard industry verbiage regarding certain transactions. This updated wording caused confusion for some members, and we will therefore be clarifying the agreement in a future release. Nothing has changed in the way we process transactions or how members are able to utilize their accounts. We appreciate the questions and feedback. This helps us make adjustments to ensure future disclosures are more clear. A few days later, ICCU released a new agreement. This time, it's more broad, stating you agree you will not use eBranch to request, send, or receive money for any unlawful or illicit purpose. The bank reserves the right to monitor, block, or cancel any payment made for those reasons, and to suspend or terminate your account. Now, it still has the same policy, not allowing people to send money for things like court-ordered amounts for alimony or child support, a term Patterson says she's still confused about. She says it's a good reminder to everyone to thoroughly read the documents before getting locked into something you don't want.
It's up to us to really look at every little thing and not just assume that they have our best interest, because I don't think they do.
And Patterson plans to keep her accounts closed. We did reach out to ICCU to break down what the new terms mean for things like child support, but we have not heard back yet on that.
Okay, so to be clear, Hunter, she was not denied any charges.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
So she seems to be, we were talking about, like a unicorn. Not many people do this, like looking at these terms and conditions, but what what can people do, I guess, if they find something in that they don't like?
Yeah, I kept calling her a unicorn too because it was incredible that she did this. Really, I mean, you can do what she did. Just pull your entire accounts out and be done with it. You can talk to the company that you're working with and say, hey, what is this? What does this mean? Get an explanation and/or work out a negotiation. Or there's also the Better Business Bureau. They usually can help you through some situations like this.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people who heard that and thought, wait a minute, you can't use your ICCU e-branch account to buy a gun in Idaho. That would be a little touchy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hunter. All right, mail time. About a month ago, we did a story on how the formula for how Idaho lottery money helps Idaho schools would be and how it would be changing for just the third time in 35 years. It's going to be going back to being split between funding school district facilities and the state's permanent buildings. So that prompted Jim in Canyon County to write in. I appreciated the piece on the lottery funds. How about the history of sales tax that started at 3% with a sunset, which obviously didn't happen? It was sold as going to schools, as I recall, said Jim. Well, Jim, you're close. The 3% thing and going to schools, that part is correct. Check on that. The sunset, though, not so much. And with the new fiscal year now about a week old, we thought it would be a good time to revisit Idaho revenues. So let's take you back to 1965. When the legislative session convened, Governor Robert Smiley wanted several things. He wanted to create a constitutional revision committee. He wanted a state water resource agency, a state park system, and a statewide junior college system. Well, Governor Smiley got all those things and one more thing, something that was tried 3 times before. 59 years ago, the 38th Idaho legislature was considered the most productive and progressive in the state's history. Perhaps none captured that more than what was considered the top story of 1965. You see, kids, in the news business, each news gathering force makes its own evaluation
of the top stories of the year. And this is the way the Channel 7 News team views the year 1965. 1965 was a year of changes, and a good many of them came from beneath the Idaho State House dome.
And those changes began with Governor Robert Smiley's State of the State address that January.
Ladies and gentlemen of the 38th session of the Idaho Legislature.
When the Republican incumbent proposed a statewide sales tax, or
The budget, when it reaches you,
in other words,
will be based upon and will recommend
with more words,
the enactment of a retail sales and use tax designed to produce revenue adequate to the needs of these expanded services.
Governor Smiley's detractors also had other words for it.
True, the course is hazardous,
Political suicide.
but in my considered political judgment, not nearly as hazardous as failure to act.
That delayed applause, an indication of the contentious legislative debate
We do have this great responsibility.
that would follow.
If you regard yourselves, senators, as conservatives, then you ought to be supporting House Bill 222.
House Bill 222 would reduce income and property taxes by $26 million.
We're shifting the burden of taxation onto the little people.
To make up for it, it would also install a first-ever sales tax of 3%, with dividends dedicated to Idaho public schools.
The only practical and the only feasible means of meeting the needs of our schools and of our state government. If you regard yourselves as liberals, you should be supporting this legislation because we cannot do those things for the people that we ought to be doing for the people without this kind of legislation.
It wouldn't be an easy sell.
Have one of the highest income taxes in the nation. We have one of the highest property taxes in the nation.
We take this sales tax road, my friends, we never get off of it. Bill will only whet the appetite to spend and to spend and to spend. There's no turning back. It's like relying upon a crutch. The muscle becomes flabby. You can't do without it.
But in the end,
Roll call shows 26 ayes, 18 nays.
the Senate bought in.
House Bill number 222 has passed the Senate.
Governor Smiley would have his signature sales tax, at least for the time being.
Anti-sales taxers were successful in gathering enough signatures to put the question of retaining or repealing the tax before the Idaho voters in the 1966 election.
The next November, 61% of Idaho voters upheld the sales tax. But at the same time, likely because of his leaning towards the levy, they decided to ditch Governor Smiley and replace him with a new Republican leader. I don't know who that senator was who said we'll never go back. He was correct, because Idaho's had a sales tax ever since 1965. And Jim, you mentioned that sales tax sunsetting. It never did. And that was never part of the plan. But that term did come into play decades later, starting with that 3% in 1965, and then again voter approved in 1966. Idaho stuck with that number until March of 1983. That began an era of volatility, which pushed the sales tax to 4%, then 4.5% 3 months later, then 30 days later it was back to 4%. By April of 1986, Idaho's consumers were paying 5% on purchases, and it stayed that way until May of 2003, when we saw 6% for the very first time. Okay, so that's where Jim's sunset comes into play, because House Bill 400 in 2003 set an end date of June 30th, 2005 in hopes of increasing general fund revenues by $13 million. But in August of 2006, Jim Risch, well, now Senator Jim Risch, he was halfway through a 7-month term as governor, having been appointed by Dirk Kempthorne to finish out his term when he left to run the Department of the Interior. In a one-day special session in August of 2006, Risch convinced the legislature to cut property taxes for public schools by $260 million, but pushing them to rely on income taxes and a new sales tax rate of 6%. That November, 72% of voters agreed to the sales tax increase. There was no real tax relief either. And we also got, well, 2 years later, schools, they got kicked in the teeth because of the Great Recession because of that bill. Well, finally, just 4.5 years ago, Senator Jim Risch at Caldwell, he pitched an idea of pushing the sales tax to nearly 8%, with that extra money going to Idaho schools and a goal of getting rid of the need for supplemental levies, but that went nowhere. So we've had several raises to the state sales tax since 1965, but none since voters overwhelmingly approved taking it to 6% in 2006. And again, we've been that way since. Not sure you've heard, but we are officially in the dog days of summer. Why they are called that has to do with astronomy and dog star rising and all that stuff, but also because these days in Idaho are the hottest of the year, and they kind of make you want to crawl under the porch like a dog looking for shade. It's also prime wildfire season, which is why Jude Binkley tells us how to steer clear of both in today's 411.
Today, the Billy Creek fire near the Idaho-Washington state line hasn't grown. The fire is still just under 3,200 acres. There continues to be no closures or evacuations. The Billy Creek fire is one of many fires that sparked and spread last week, and the hot temperatures aren't making fire danger any better. The Bureau of Land Management in Idaho is asking for your help to prevent human-caused wildfires. They say avoid target shooting, don't leave your campfire unattended, and make sure it's cold to the touch before you leave. Don't drive or park on tall, dry grass, stay on trails, and don't mow the lawn or use equipment like that during the heat of the day. Also, they say to report any smoke or suspicious activity right away so they can fight fires as soon as possible. The heat is also dangerous for those who are experiencing homelessness. A local nonprofit, Catch, is asking for donations to help support vulnerable people. They're looking for things like bottled water, reusable water bottles, sports drinks, hats, and sun umbrellas. You can drop these items off at their Boise office on 503 South Americana Boulevard. People can also send supplies directly to the nonprofit by buying items from their Amazon wish list. And that's the 411 on the 208. I'm Jude Binkley.
Those pictures remind me that usually we have the heat at the end of June, getting into the first part of July. It's a little later this year, but we definitely have the heat. I wanted to start out with this black background. This is the visible smoke satellite. So if you take a look at this, you can see where Boise is at over here in portions of eastern Oregon. So here's the 405 and the 5 over here in the Willamette Valley. And I'm going to stop this right at the portion of Sunrise where you see the smoke starting to see it in that circulation and in that pattern. It's not quite to Boise, but it's close. And with this heating and with this dome of high pressure, the drifting of the smoke may be coming our way. So, you know, not only do we have the heat of summer, but we also have the smoke around the area. We've experienced that for years past, and it looks like we're going to be seeing that come in too, just so it doesn't take you by surprise. Now, in the way of Bogus Basin for today, if you look down in the valley, here's earlier this morning, and then as you look at the afternoon, Look how it gets a little darker out there, okay? Well, the heating, as far as the pollution, and even some smoke that's possibly out there for late this afternoon as well as this evening. Record heat for this week, let's just talk about on July the 10th, which begins on Wednesday. The record for that date is 105 back in 2002. The high forecast for that day is 108. So it's likely that the first record will be on Wednesday, possibly. Then on July 11th, the record's 109. And the high is 105, so no record there, nor here on July the 12th, which is 111, which is the record for the date. No, we're not going to get there, but we're 107, which is pretty close to the same. That was back in 1898. We also had a 111 on the 13th of this month back in 1960, and that's the all-time record high at 111 degrees. I can't leave you without showing you the next 7 days. And as you can see, this is relentless. And it's an excessive heat warning that's in effect, which will be off and on, and you'll see why continuing on with temperatures throughout the week well above 100 degrees. They may come down just a little bit. A chance of some lightning and some thunderstorms the first part of next week may bring some of these temperatures down just a bit. We don't need that because of the fires, but of course, as you look at the next 10 days, boy, we sure have the heat.
Yeah, like Rick said, it is hot, and it looks like it's going to stay that way. And it's also what we've been talking about for the last 2 days. So what about, though, what we've been saying for the last several years, or even longer, like decades, when it comes down to how to handle it when it's hotter than Hades? Okay, so stop me if you've heard this one before, like a lot of times. Hot off the presses, this time of the year, like so many Julys before, seems like the perfect time to take you back to the scorching story on how to beat the heat 208 style into today's Read Aisle. These stories always seem to start with a shot of the sun because, after all, it's the main reason we're doing these stories. We all know it's gonna be hot. I mean, cue the customary confirming question and answer. It's gonna be hot today.
Yes, it is.
And here we go. When the temperatures keep climbing, there are two types of heat handlers. Those who try to beat it, and those who embrace it. But like this other shot of the sun you probably expected to see right about now, it's something you already knew. Still, we feel the need to, reaffirm what else you already know about keeping cool and safe in Idaho's heat. The most important thing to remember in heat like this, and I'm sure you probably heard this before, hydration. According to the Mayo Clinic, a man would have to drink 4 liters of water, or nearly 4 liters of water, 3.7 to be exact, to be hydrated throughout the day. Women, a little bit less, about 2.7. Still, it's a lot of water. And right now is a good time to start. Okay, so here's another thing you probably already heard. You want to try to stay cool, and that means staying away from that as much as possible. And to do that, guess what? You got to find some shade. Oh gosh, okay. Okay, so while I move this table, please enjoy another shot of the sun, and this guy getting some of it. Oh yeah, don't forget to hydrate. Okay, so you made it into the shade, but what if you have to be out in the sun? How do you protect yourself? Oh, I know, sunscreen. And they say it's gotta be broad spectrum and at least 30 SPF. They are the American Academy of Dermatology, and they say it needs to be applied every 2 hours or after swimming and or sweating, which is pretty easy to do on a day like today. So how much should you use? Well, again, according to the American Academy of Dermatology, in order to cover all the areas that your clothes don't, you're gonna need about an ounce of sunscreen to cover the spots where your clothes don't. Like this guy. I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot, but yet it kind of is. Don't forget, fluids. Kind of runs right through you. Okay, so I hope we help you beat the heat with these tips. Okay, who put an egg on the asphalt? Gross. Oh yeah, one more thing, and probably most important. Don't ever leave kids or pets in cars, especially on a day like today. Oh look, a cookie on the dashboard. It's like it's fresh out of the oven. So settle in, folks. We got a whole summer coming. And a whole string of triple-digit days going ahead to us, so next 7 days for sure. All right, to find out more tips to beat the heat, we've got plenty of stories on our website right now. You can also tune into the news at 6, where we're going to tell you where all the cooling stations, you can find them. We're going to tell you where they are one more time. All right, when it comes to terms and conditions, the fine print and the long list of those, Gary in Nampa had this to say. He says his problem with reading the entire paper is that there are so many parts, I don't even understand when I read the entire thing. So yeah, sometimes you do need a lawyer to look over some of the things that they have printed there, but just do your best. If you find a problem, feel free to contact the company and probably solve it without having to, I don't know, just forget the whole thing entirely. My problem with reading it, we already did that one. What did Idaho do before the 3% sales tax to pay the bills? This is a question from, I'm not sure where this one came from, but the question, or the answer is, they relied on income taxes and property taxes. Then they started bringing in the sales tax to pay for that. The other one is, let's skip ahead here to the next one. Well, they seem to be out of order. Well, this one, let me just read off this list because, again, we're having technical issues. When the sales tax began, the money was supposed to go to the schools. But where's it going now, Bob wants to know. It's definitely not going to the schools. Gary in Boise says he remembers his parents arguing about the 3% sales tax. My dad said it was only used for the schools. And my mom said politicians would hijack the money for other purposes. And that's kind of where it is now. It goes to the general fund, but that money does get used to pay for schools here in Idaho. So you're kind of half right on that. Just not as much as what was originally intended, I'm guessing. I always felt Jim Risch was directly responsible for putting Idaho's education funding in the annual crisis it has become. It's a disgrace. He should be ashamed. That's from Bob and Jerome. But Bob, even Jim Risch can point to the 72% who approved it in 2006 and say, that's what everyone wanted, right? We'll see you tomorrow.